My daughter looked me straight in the eye at the airport and said quietly, "Mom, you're flying economy. We're in business class. And please don't try to sit with us. It would be embarrassing." For a moment, the entire terminal went silent in my head. I just stared at her. My own daughter. The girl I had raised. The girl whose plane tickets I had secretly paid for 5 days earlier. My hands froze on the handle of my suitcase, because in that moment I realized something terrifying. Ashley didn't know the tickets were in my name. And when the boarding announcement came, everything was about to change. I'm really glad you're here listening to this story. If stories like this interest you, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps these stories reach more people. That morning at Denver International Airport had started so normally. Cold winter sunlight spilled through the enormous glass windows and stretched across the polished terminal floor like pale gold. Travelers moved in every direction, pulling their suitcases behind them with the soft rattling sound that fills every airport in the world. Announcements echoed above us. Someone laughed nearby. A toddler cried somewhere behind the coffee stand. Everything felt ordinary, and I remember feeling quietly happy. Christmas was only 2 days away, and for the first time in months I was going to spend it with my daughter Ashley and my 2 grandchildren Lily and Noah. For weeks I had been looking forward to that moment. At my age, you learn not to take family gatherings for granted. Children grow busy with their own lives. Holidays become shorter. Phone calls become quick. But Christmas still mattered. At least I believed it did. I had arrived early, the way I always do. Old habits from years of running a small accounting office had never left me. I prefer to be early and calm rather than rushed and apologizing. My suitcase was small and practical. I had packed carefully the night before. Inside were wrapped gifts for the children, a thick wool scarf Ashley once admired in a shop window, and a tin box of homemade butter cookies I had baked the day before. Lily loved them when she was younger, and I hope she still did. I had imagined her smile when she saw them. When I finally spotted Ashley and her family standing near the priority check-in counter, my heart lifted immediately. Ashley looked beautiful, as she always did when she traveled. She wore a beige coat that fit her perfectly, the kind of coat that makes a woman look composed even when the world is chaotic. Her long suitcase stood beside her, sleek and expensive. Mark leaned against the counter nearby, scrolling through his phone with the relaxed confidence of a man who believes everything in life is under control. The children sat together a few steps away, their heads bent over their tablets, their small fingers tapping across glowing screens. For a moment, I simply stood there watching them. My family, my daughter, my grandchildren, the people I had worked my entire life to support. There is a quiet pride that lives inside a mother when she sees her children living comfortably. It isn't loud or dramatic. It's simply a warm feeling that settles somewhere behind the ribs. I felt that warmth then. I raised my hand and waved. "Ashley." She turned and saw me. For just a second her face brightened with recognition, the way it used to when she was younger, and ran toward me after school. "Mom." She stepped forward and hugged me quickly. Her perfume smelled expensive and delicate. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly. Lily glanced up from her tablet. "Hi, Grandma." Noah lifted his hand in a quick wave without looking away from his screen. Mark nodded politely. "Good morning, Evelyn." His voice was friendly enough, though his attention returned almost immediately to his phone. Still, I told myself everything was normal. Families change as children grow older. Affection becomes quieter, less dramatic. Life becomes busy. I placed my suitcase beside theirs. "I'm glad we're all flying together," I said. "It's been a long time since we traveled as a family." Ashley gave a small smile, but her eyes flickered briefly toward the check-in counter. Then she leaned closer to me slightly, lowering her voice. "Mom, there's actually been a small issue with the seating." At that moment, I felt a faint tightening in my stomach. The kind of small, instinctive tension that appears when something isn't quite right, even if you can't yet explain why. I had no idea that within the next few minutes, a single sentence from my daughter would change the way I saw our entire relationship. And I certainly had no idea that the boarding announcement, still nearly an hour away, would expose a truth Ashley clearly did not expect. Ashley glanced over her shoulder to make sure Lily and Noah were still busy with their tablets, then stepped closer to me and lowered her voice as though she were sharing some harmless little inconvenience. Mom, there's been a small issue with the seating. Her tone was light, almost polished, but something in it made my stomach tighten. What kind of issue? I asked. She shifted the strap of her handbag higher on her shoulder and gave me a smile that never reached her eyes. Mark's company booked our tickets through their travel account, she said. There was some kind of mix-up with yours. I looked at her without speaking. She continued too quickly now. So you're in economy and we're in business class. There was a tiny pause after that sentence, as if she expected me to absorb it quietly and make everything easy for her. Then she leaned even closer and said the words that changed everything. Please don't try to sit with us. It would be embarrassing. Embarrassing. Not difficult. Not inconvenient. Not impossible. Embarrassing. I felt something inside me go completely still. Around us, the terminal kept moving. A family rolled matching silver suitcases past the check-in line. Someone nearby laughed too loudly. A boarding announcement echoed from another gate. Coffee, perfume, wet wool, and airplane fuel drifted through the conditioned air in that strange airport mixture that never smells quite clean and never smells entirely unpleasant either. But in my mind, everything narrowed to my daughter's face. Ashley was looking at me with the expression people use when they are trying to manage a situation they believe is beneath them. Her voice had dropped into that careful, patient tone I had heard before over the years, usually when she wanted me to cooperate without asking too many questions. Mom, she said softly, it's only a few hours. And it's Christmas travel. It's hectic. Let's just not make a scene. Not make a scene. I stared at her. My own daughter. The child I had once carried on my hip while balancing grocery bags in my other hand. The child whose school costumes I had sewn by hand because buying new ones was too expensive back then. The child who had cried into my shoulder the night her father died, whispering that she didn't know how we would survive without him. And now here she was, asking me not to embarrass her by existing too close to the seats I had paid for. I don't think she noticed the way my hand tightened around the handle of my suitcase. Maybe she didn't notice because Mark was standing a few feet away, half listening and half reading something on his phone, smiling to himself as if none of this concerned him. Maybe she didn't notice because Lily suddenly laughed at something on her screen, and Noah asked if there would be Wi-Fi on the plane. Or maybe Ashley simply no longer looked at me closely enough to see when I was hurt. That realization stung more than her words. I swallowed once and asked very quietly, Mark's company booked all of them? She nodded. That's what I said. There was the faintest impatience in her voice now. Not guilt. Impatience. As though I were making this harder than it needed to be. I looked past her toward the priority counter, where passengers in tailored coats and polished shoes were handing over passports with easy confidence. Then I looked back at my daughter and understood, all at once, that she believed this story herself, or else she had repeated it enough times to make it feel true. Because Ashley did not know something very important. Those tickets had not come from Mark's company. 5 days earlier, Ashley had called me sounding tired and stressed. She told me holiday fares were outrageous. She said the children were disappointed. She said Mark had hoped his office would cover some travel, but nothing had been confirmed. She never directly asked me for help. She didn't need to. By then I knew the shape of those calls. They always circled the need before landing on it. That evening after we hung up, I sat alone in my kitchen in Portland with a cup of tea gone cold beside my laptop. I opened the airline website, searched the holiday routes, and stared for a long time at the prices. Then I booked 4 seats. Business class. Round trip. Denver to New York. $19,200. I booked them through my own frequent flyer account under my own name with my own card because I wanted the children comfortable and Ashley relaxed. I told myself it would feel wonderful to surprise them. I told myself a mother is allowed to do nice things for her family at Christmas. I did not tell Ashley. I forwarded the confirmations to an email address Mark had once used for travel documents, assuming they would understand what had happened. Now, standing there in the terminal while my daughter asked me not to come near their seats, I realized something almost absurd. She had never even looked closely at the booking. She had simply accepted the upgrade as something owed to her. And worse than that, she had accepted me being separated from them as something natural. That was the moment the humiliation gave way to clarity, because this was no longer about a plain seat. It was about the way Ashley had come to see me. Useful, generous, available. A woman who could give, but should remain discreet while giving. A mother who could pay but should never claim space. I looked at her carefully, and for the first time in a very long while, I did not rush to smooth things over. I did not smile. I did not say it was fine. I did not pretend not to mind. Instead I asked, "And you think that's acceptable?" Ashley blinked, as if the question itself surprised her. "Mom, please," she said, glancing around. "Don't start." Those two words settled something in me. Don't start. As if pain begins only when it is spoken aloud. As if disrespect becomes harmless when the injured person stays polite. I nodded once. "All right," I said. Ashley visibly relaxed. She thought I was giving in. She thought the awkward moment had passed. She had no idea that the real moment had not happened yet, because the boarding passes had not been scanned. And when they were, Ashley was about to learn exactly whose seat she had just told me not to approach. As I stood there in the terminal watching Lily laugh quietly at something on her tablet, a familiar tightness formed in my chest. It was a feeling I had not experienced in a long time, yet the sensation was instantly recognizable. It was the same quiet pressure that used to appear in the years after my husband died. Moments like that arrive without warning. One second you are standing in an airport surrounded by strangers, and the next second your mind begins walking backward through time. I watched my granddaughter tuck a strand of hair behind her ear as she smiled at her brother, and suddenly I was remembering another little girl with the same expression. Ashley at 9 years old. Ashley sitting at our kitchen table in Portland with a bowl of cereal, her feet not yet reaching the floor. Those memories always come gently at first, but they carry weight. After my husband passed away, the house became unbearably quiet. The first winter without him felt endless. The furnace hummed through long evenings, and every sound echoed in rooms that once held laughter and arguments in ordinary life. Ashley called often during those early years. First the calls were simple. She missed me. She wanted advice. She needed help with small things. Those small things came slowly at the beginning. A car down payment when her old one failed. A semester of tuition when Mark was between consulting contracts. A few $1,000s for Lily's daycare. Every request arrived wrapped in the same careful promise. "Mom, we'll pay you back soon." I always believed her. Not because I expected the money to return, but because I trusted the intention behind the words. When you love someone deeply, you don't keep score. At least that's what I believed back then. The transfers became routine over time. 5,000 here. 10,000 there. Sometimes more. Ashley always sounded relieved when the help arrived. "Mom, you saved us again," she would say with a grateful laugh. I told myself that was enough. A mother does not need repayment. She only needs to feel useful. For years I convinced myself that this was simply how families worked. Parents help. Children struggle. Life moves forward. But standing there in the airport watching my daughter speak to me with quiet embarrassment, a small voice inside me asked a question I had avoided for a very long time. When had helping turned into something expected? Because somewhere along the way the tone of Ashley's voice had changed. The gratitude faded first. Then the apologies disappeared. Eventually the requests no longer sounded like requests at all. They sounded like arrangements that had already been decided. I did not notice when that shift happened. Or maybe I noticed and chose not to examine it too closely. Mothers are very good at protecting the image of their children. We edit memories in ways that make love easier to maintain. But there were moments that should have warned me. Small moments. Quiet moments. The kind that seem harmless when they occur, yet grow larger when remembered later. One of those moments happened during a visit 3 years earlier. I had flown out to see the children for Lily's birthday. The house was beautiful. Large windows. Expensive furniture. Everything carefully arranged. But something about the atmosphere felt strangely tense. I noticed Lily grew quiet whenever Mark entered the room. Not frightened, just careful. And I noticed Ashley would change the subject every time finances came up in conversation. One afternoon I picked Lily up from school while Ashley was at work. Her teacher walked with us to the parking lot and spoke casually as teachers often do. "She talks about money a lot," the teacher said with a small smile. For a 10-year-old, that's unusual. I remember laughing politely at the time, but the comment stayed with me long after I returned home. Children usually talk about toys, friends, or pets. They don't normally discuss bills and expenses unless those subjects are common in the house. That thought unsettled me briefly, but like so many uncomfortable thoughts, I tucked it away and moved forward. It was easier to believe everything was fine. Standing in the airport years later, watching Ashley adjust the sleeve of her expensive coat while explaining why my presence in business class would embarrass her, those memories returned with unexpected clarity. Because suddenly the pattern felt impossible to ignore. All the help, all the quiet transfers, all the reassurances that everything would work out soon. And now this moment. My daughter speaking to me as if my place in her life required careful management. As if my presence might disrupt the image she preferred the world to see. Across the terminal, a boarding announcement echoed faintly through the loudspeakers. Passengers shifted in their seats. Suitcases rolled toward the gates. The flight that Ashley believed she understood was slowly approaching its first call. And she still had no idea that the tickets she was protecting so carefully had been purchased with my name. First, Mark had seemed perfect. I remember the first evening Ashley introduced him to me. We were sitting in a small restaurant in Portland, one of those quiet places where the lights are soft, and the music stays low enough that people can talk without raising their voices. He arrived exactly on time. Tall, neatly dressed, confident without appearing arrogant. He shook my hand firmly and looked directly into my eyes when he spoke, something many younger men no longer bother to do. Ashley has told me so much about you, Evelyn, he said with a warm, polished smile. It's nice to finally meet the woman who raised her. At the time I remember feeling relieved. When your daughter introduces you to someone new, a mother's heart becomes very attentive. We watch carefully, noticing things other people might miss. Tone of voice. Small gestures. The way a man listens when your child speaks. Mark seemed attentive. He asked questions about my work. He laughed at Ashley's stories from childhood. He even insisted on paying the restaurant bill despite my quiet protest. On the drive home that evening, Ashley sounded almost giddy. Isn't he wonderful? She asked. He seems very charming, I replied carefully. Not just charming, she said quickly. Successful. His consulting firm works with investment groups all over the country. She said the word successful with a certain pride that I recognized immediately. Ashley had always admired people who moved confidently through the world. At first, I believed she had simply found someone whose ambitions matched her own. But small things began to trouble me over time. Nothing dramatic. Just details that lingered in the back of my mind. Mark talked about money constantly. Not in the practical way people discuss budgets or responsibilities, but in the speculative language of opportunity. Capital rotation. Short-term leverage. Strategic liquidity. Those were phrases he used casually during dinner conversations. Sometimes he spoke about investments the way gamblers talk about the next hand of cards, as if the win was always just one step away. Ashley began repeating those phrases too. Over time their conversations started sounding less like planning and more like anticipation. The future was always about to improve. The next deal was always about to work. The next investment was always about to change everything. Yet somehow every year brought a new temporary setback. A delayed partnership. A client who paid late. An investment that needed a little more time. Each problem arrived with the same calm explanation. We're just between opportunities right now. During those periods, Ashley's phone calls to me became more frequent. At first she sounded embarrassed when asking for help. Mom, this is temporary. I promise. Later the embarrassment faded. The requests became smoother. More practiced. $5,000. $10,000. Sometimes more. And Mark rarely spoke to me directly about those matters. Instead he would appear briefly at the end of the call, his voice warm but distant. Thanks again, Evelyn, he would say. You're really helping us stabilize things. Stabilize. I often wondered what exactly required so much stabilizing. One memory in particular returned to me that morning in the airport. It was from a quiet summer afternoon 3 years earlier. I had been visiting for a few days while Ashley attended a work conference, helping with the children while Mark handled his consulting calls from home. Lily sat at the kitchen table doing homework. Noah built an elaborate tower from plastic blocks across the floor. The house smelled like laundry detergent and tomato soup simmering slowly on the stove. When Mark walked into the room, Lily's shoulders stiffened slightly. Not fear, just caution. It was subtle, the kind of movement most people would miss entirely. "Hi, Dad," she said quietly. Mark dropped his keys into the bowl by the door. "Homework done yet?" he asked without looking up. "Almost." "Good." That was all. Nothing cruel. Nothing alarming. And yet the room had shifted in a way that made me uneasy. Later that afternoon I walked Lily to school pickup while Ashley was still away. Her teacher spoke with me casually while children ran around the playground behind us. "She talks about money quite a lot," the teacher said kindly. "For a child her age, that's unusual." I asked what she meant. The teacher smiled awkwardly. "Oh, little things. She sometimes worries about whether activities cost too much, or if her parents can afford certain things." The comment stayed with me long after that conversation ended. Children should not carry those worries. They should think about school plays and birthday cakes. But somehow the language of money had already entered Lily's world. At the time I told myself it meant nothing. Every family has different conversations. Every household has its own concerns. Still, the memory lingered. Now, standing in the airport terminal years later, watching Mark laugh quietly at something on his phone while Ashley adjusted her designer luggage beside the priority counter, those old moments returned with unexpected clarity. Because the picture in front of me didn't quite match the story I had been hearing for years. A man whose investments were always about to succeed. A family who always seemed to need temporary help. And a daughter who had just asked her own mother not to embarrass her on a flight she believed someone else had paid for. I watched Mark glance briefly toward us before returning his attention to the screen in his hand. For a moment I wondered if he knew the truth about those tickets. If he understood whose name was attached to them. But his relaxed posture suggested something else entirely. He looked like a man who believed everything was already settled. And that belief was about to become a very uncomfortable surprise. Because the boarding announcement was coming soon. And when those boarding passes were scanned, the airline system would reveal something Ashley and Mark clearly hadn't bothered to check. The seats they were protecting so carefully were never actually theirs. Back in the airport terminal, Ashley had already turned away. The conversation, at least in her mind, was finished. She stepped toward the priority counter where a short line of business-class passengers had already formed. Mark joined her without asking a single question about what had just been said between us. He slipped his phone into the pocket of his coat and glanced up at the departure screens as if everything around him were perfectly ordinary. Lily and Noah followed a moment later, still holding their tablets. Within seconds the small circle that had briefly included me quietly closed again. I remained where I was, one hand resting on the handle of my suitcase. It's a strange thing when humiliation arrives without noise. No shouting. No dramatic gestures. Just a calm sentence that settles into your chest and slowly begins to spread. For years I had imagined that if my daughter ever truly hurt me, it would happen during a fight. Voices raised. Doors slammed. Words spoken in anger that might later be taken back. But this was different. Ashley had spoken politely, carefully, almost professionally, as though she were managing a delicate social situation rather than speaking to her mother. Across the terminal, the loudspeaker crackled and a boarding announcement began for another flight. Passengers stood. Suitcases rolled. Life moved forward with the steady rhythm of travel. And suddenly I felt very tired. Not physically tired. The deeper kind. The kind that settles in after years of explaining things away. I walked slowly toward an empty row of seats near the windows and sat down. From there I could still see Ashley and Mark standing at the priority counter. Ashley leaned slightly toward the airline agent while Mark rested one hand on the handle of his luggage, nodding as if the world naturally arranged itself in his favor. For a long time I simply watched them. Then I reached into my purse and took out my phone. My fingers hesitated over the screen for a moment before dialing. The call connected quickly. "Good morning," a calm voice answered. "Hello," I said quietly. "This is Evelyn Carter. I'd like a record of every transfer I've made over the past 2 years." There was a short pause. Of course, Mrs. Carter. Would you like those emailed to you? Yes. The representative asked a few security questions. I answered them automatically, barely listening to my own voice. Is there anything else I can help you with today? She asked politely. I looked across the terminal again. Ashley was laughing softly at something Mark had just said. The children were standing beside them now, their small backpacks hanging from their shoulders. They looked comfortable, confident, as if the world had always worked this way. Yes, I said after a moment. Please include the airline purchase I made last week. Certainly. The call ended. I placed the phone back in my purse and folded my hands together on top of my suitcase. For the first time that morning, I felt something inside me shift again. Not anger. Not sadness. Something colder. Curiosity. Because suddenly I wanted to see something clearly. All the help. All the quiet transfers. All the promises that things would improve soon. Numbers have a way of telling the truth that emotions often hide. That evening, after we arrived in New York and I checked into the hotel Ashley had suggested, the email was waiting for me. I opened the document slowly. At first the numbers didn't quite register. Transfer after transfer filled the screen. $5,000, $8,000, $12,000, tuition payments, emergency loans, mortgage assistance. The total appeared at the bottom of the page. $163,000. I stared at the number for a long time. Not a single dollar had ever been repaid. And somehow, after all of that, my daughter had still found it embarrassing to sit beside me on a flight. Outside the hotel window, traffic moved steadily through the streets below. Inside the quiet room, the glow of the laptop screen reflected off the glass. For years I had told myself that helping my daughter was simply part of being a parent. But that night, seeing the numbers laid out clearly for the first time, a different question began to form in my mind. Not why I had given the money. That part was easy. The real question was something much harder. Why Ashley had come to believe it was hers. The real turning point happened 2 months later. Not in an airport. Not on the plane. But in a courtroom. I never imagined I would see my daughter sitting across from me at a long wooden table, her lawyer whispering quietly beside her while a judge reviewed documents that described my life as if it belonged to someone else. Ashley and Mark had filed a petition against me. According to them, I was no longer capable of managing my own finances. They used careful language, of course. Lawyers rarely say things bluntly. Every sentence was wrapped in polite concern. Concern for her well-being. Possible cognitive decline. Need for financial oversight. Those were the phrases their attorney repeated again and again. But the meaning behind those words was painfully simple. They wanted control. Control of my accounts. Control of my investments. Control of the money I had spent 40 years earning. When I first opened the legal envelope that arrived in my mailbox, I did not feel anger. I felt something colder. Recognition. Because suddenly many small conversations from the previous years began rearranging themselves into a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Mark's questions about my retirement accounts. Ashley asking how my investments were structured. The casual way Mark once suggested that, for convenience, it might make sense to assign someone power of attorney in case anything happened. At the time I had laughed. Nothing is happening, I told him. Now I understood something unsettling. They hadn't simply been asking questions. They had been studying the path to everything I owned. The courtroom that morning was quiet, almost strangely calm. Ashley sat beside Mark at the opposing table. She wore a navy blazer and a simple necklace that made her look responsible, professional, even fragile. When she saw me enter, her eyes filled with something that looked like sadness. But she didn't stand. She didn't walk toward me. She didn't say a word. She simply watched me take my seat beside my lawyer. Mark avoided looking at me entirely. The hearing began with their attorney presenting the case. He spoke smoothly, confidently. According to him, my recent financial decisions suggested instability. He mentioned the airline tickets, the transfers, the gifts. He described them as impulsive actions made by someone who might no longer fully understand the value of money. While he spoke, Ashley kept her hands folded carefully on the table. Occasionally she nodded. It was a convincing performance. The kind designed to make a judge feel sympathetic. until my lawyer stood. His name was Richard Hale. Richard was not dramatic. He did not raise his voice. He did not interrupt. Instead, he walked calmly to the judge's desk carrying a thick folder and placed it in front of him. Then he opened it. Inside were 2 years of financial records. Every bank transfer. Every email. Every written message from Ashley promising repayment. The judge began turning the pages slowly. One page. Then another. Then another. The room grew quieter with every document. Richard spoke only once. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "my client is not financially incompetent." He paused briefly. "She has simply been generous." Then he pointed to the final document in the folder. An airline receipt. Business class tickets. For passengers. Purchase with my account. Purchase with my card. Purchased in my name. The judge studied the receipt for several seconds. Then he looked directly at Ashley. "Is it correct," he asked slowly, "that you told your mother not to sit with you on a flight she personally paid for?" Ashley's face went completely pale. Her mouth opened slightly but no answer came out. Mark leaned toward their attorney and whispered something urgently. But it didn't matter anymore. Because in that moment the entire story they had prepared collapsed. This was not a case of protecting a vulnerable parent. It was a case of children trying to control a woman who had quietly supported them for years. Ashley's eyes filled with tears. "Mom," she whispered softly. It was the first time she had spoken directly to me since the hearing began. But by then something inside me had already shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet understanding that arrived like the closing of a door. The judge closed the folder. "I see no evidence of financial incompetence," he said firmly. "In fact, these records demonstrate very careful financial management." He looked once more at Ashley and Mark. "This petition is dismissed." The sound of his gavel was soft, but it echoed in the silent room. Ashley sat frozen in her chair. Mark stared down at the table as if the surface might swallow him. 2 years of quiet generosity had been exposed in less than 15 minutes. And for the first time in a very long while, the truth was no longer something I carried alone. When the hearing ended, no one moved for several seconds. Courtrooms have a particular kind of silence after a decision is made. It isn't loud or dramatic. It's a quiet pause where everyone seems to be adjusting to a reality that suddenly looks different from what they expected. Ashley remained sitting in her chair. Her hands were still folded neatly on the table, exactly as they had been during the hearing, but now they were trembling slightly. Mark leaned back in his seat, staring down at the documents spread across the table as though they belonged to someone else. Their lawyer whispered something to them, but neither of them answered. My own lawyer began gathering the papers calmly. "Mrs. Carter," he said quietly, "that concludes everything for today." I nodded. For a moment I simply remained seated, allowing the weight of the morning to settle. Strangely, I did not feel victorious. I did not feel angry. Mostly I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not the loud kind of relief people show when a crisis ends. The quiet kind. The kind that settles into your chest when you finally understand something you have been avoiding for years. I stood slowly. Across the room Ashley looked up. Her eyes were red now. "Mom," she said softly. It was the same word she had spoken earlier, but this time it sounded different. Less certain. Less controlled. For a moment I thought she might walk toward me. Instead she stayed where she was. The distance between us remained exactly the same. I picked up my coat and walked toward the exit of the courtroom. The hallway outside was bright with afternoon light. A few people sat on benches waiting for their own hearings, their conversations low and serious. Behind me I heard footsteps. Ashley. She reached me just before I reached the elevator. "Mom, please," she said. Her voice was trembling now. I turned slowly to face her. Up close she looked younger somehow, the confident composure she usually carried replaced by something uncertain. "I didn't think it would go like this," she said quickly. Those words lingered in the air between us. Not "I'm sorry." Not "I was wrong." Simply, I didn't think it would go like this. For years I might have rushed to comfort her. I might have reassured her that everything would be fine. But something inside me had changed. Quietly. Permanently. Ashley, I said gently, I know. She looked confused. You know. Yes. Because the truth was simple. I knew exactly how she thought it would go. She had expected the judge to believe their story. She had expected my money to become something she could manage. She had expected me to remain quiet, grateful, and cooperative, just as I had been for years. Mark appeared a few steps behind her in the hallway. He didn't say anything. He simply watched. For the first time since I had known him, his usual confidence seemed to have disappeared. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Ashley stepped closer. Mom, can we talk about this? She asked. I looked at her for a moment. The little girl I once carried to school still existed somewhere inside that woman. But she was far away now, somewhere behind years of choices. I think we already did, I replied quietly. Then I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed slowly. Through the narrowing gap I saw Ashley standing in the hallway beside Mark, her arms hanging at her sides, her expression uncertain. When the elevator reached the ground floor, I stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. The sky was clear. Traffic moved steadily along the street. People walked past the courthouse steps talking about ordinary things, lunch plans, phone calls, errands. Life continued exactly as it always had. But for the first time in years, something felt different inside me. I walked toward my car slowly, and with every step, the strange weight I had carried for so long seemed to grow lighter. Not because the past had changed, but because I finally understood it. Life did not change all at once after that day. There was no dramatic moment of triumph. No sudden transformation the way people sometimes imagine when a long conflict ends. Real life rarely works that way. Instead, things shifted slowly. Quietly. In the weeks after the court hearing, I returned to Portland and resumed the simple routines that had always structured my days. Morning coffee by the kitchen window, a walk through the neighborhood park, occasional lunches with old friends I had neglected for too long while trying to solve problems that were never really mine to fix. For the first time in many years, my phone was quiet. Ashley did not call. Mark did not send messages. At first the silence felt strange. Then gradually it began to feel peaceful. Without constant requests and quiet expectations hanging over every conversation, my life opened in ways I had not noticed were possible. One afternoon I walked past a small art studio near the riverfront. A sign in the window read, "Beginner painting classes, Wednesdays." I stood there longer than I intended. When I was younger, before work and responsibilities filled every corner of my schedule, I used to sketch in notebooks. Nothing serious, just small drawings of flowers or streets or coffee cups sitting on tables. Somewhere along the years, that habit had quietly disappeared. That afternoon I walked inside the studio and signed up for the next class. The instructor was a cheerful woman in her 60s who smelled faintly of turpentine and lavender soap. The room was filled with people who seemed to be rediscovering small parts of themselves. No one asked about my bank accounts. No one needed anything from me. They simply handed me a brush and showed me how to mix colors again. Felt surprisingly good. Weeks passed. My life became calmer, lighter. I traveled a little. Nothing extravagant. Just small trips to places I had always meant to visit but never found time for. I began reading again in the evenings instead of reviewing bank statements or answering anxious phone calls. Slowly, I started remembering something I had forgotten. What it felt like to live a life that belonged entirely to me. Then, several months later, something unexpected happened. It was a quiet Sunday evening. Rain tapped gently against the windows, and the house smelled faintly of the tomato soup I had just finished cooking. The doorbell rang. At first I assumed it might be a neighbor or perhaps a delivery. But when I opened the door, I found Lily standing on the porch. She looked taller than the last time I had seen her. Her backpack hung loosely from one shoulder, and her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail that reminded me very much of Ashley when she was the same age. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she looked up at me with the serious expression children wear when they are trying to be brave. "Hi, Grandma," she said quietly. My heart tightened immediately. "Lily," I said softly. Behind her, a car idled at the curb. I couldn't see who was inside. Lily shifted her weight slightly and held the straps of her backpack. "Grandma, can we talk?" she asked. There was something in her voice that made the moment feel larger than it appeared. Not dramatic, just important. I stepped aside and opened the door wider. Of course, I said. She walked inside slowly, looking around the familiar living room as though she hadn't been there in a very long time. And in that moment, as I watched my granddaughter step back into my home, I realized something I had not fully understood before. Sometimes the hardest boundary you ever set becomes the very thing that protects the future. What did I learn from all of this? For most of my life, I believed that love meant giving without limits. I believed that if you helped your family enough, supported them enough, sacrificed enough, they would naturally understand the value of what you had done. But life has a quiet way of correcting our beliefs. Love without boundaries isn't love. It is permission to be used. And sometimes the most powerful word a parent can say, even to their own child, is no. The names and certain details in this story have been changed to respect privacy, but the lesson behind it is very real. Now I'm curious about something. If you had been standing in that airport beside me, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. And if stories like this speak to you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. There are many more stories still to come.